Kia ora tātou, ko Dave Henderson taku ingoa. Dave Henderson, I'm based in Wellington, but I've been involved in the sector for a very long time. And I was trying to add up how many organisations I've been involved in over the years. I'm not quite sure, but it dates from the mid-70s. The title of our presentation is pretty much an indication of where we're coming from in terms of our support for the sector. Just a quick slide about who we are. Sue and I each had plenty else going on in our lives, but we were approached by firstly the Boren Foundation and then the Todd Foundation, and those foundations put together a consortium of 12 philanthropic trusts, community trusts, foundations and the like, and invited us to do this work, partly because the two of us have been talking about needs to make the charities legislation more appropriate for a number of years. So my attempt to retire failed. Sue and I are both members of the official core reference group working with the department, but this work is undertaken entirely independently. So given that it is independent, I mean, you may disagree with what we say, that's your right. This is just our experience that we're expressing. I just want to quickly thank those 12 community trusts who did throw money in a pot to pay for Sue's and my travel on our actually being here. And also at the bottom line you'll see there's 3 accounting and law firm, and I'd acknowledge Stephen here from Parry Field, who's videoing this to be able to share. And also Strategic Grants, the bottom left there, who have helped us with a national survey that has delivered some really interesting perspectives on the sector. Leaping right into the big picture, government signed up to these 17 goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, in 2015, and we have to meet a whole lot of targets in these 17 areas by 2030. There's very little work going to focus on them at the moment, but the reality is, from a community sector point of view, a charitable sector point of view, government's not able to do those. I see a few people photographing them, that's great, but you can find them online if you look up Sustainable Development Goals. But from our perspective, what's important is that apart from all the numbers about how big we are as a sector, government's not going to get anywhere near achieving those without our help. This is our kaupapa. This is what we're existing for. These areas about health, education, housing, community development, well-being, achieving a fairer, more cohesive society. This is what we're about. So we can really help government with this, and in fact government's not going to be able to do it without us. But the feedback we're getting, and the feedback we heard from the 12
passion that they bring to their work is not in question. But what is in question is that we have a fundamental disagreement on the law. And it's not always actually just the act itself, but it's the way the act is being interpreted. I'd also like to acknowledge Stephen Moe. Thank you very much for videoing this today. So I'd like to start by taking us back to 2004. Those of you who were around in 2004 will recall that the original Charities Bill that was first introduced into Parliament was widely regarded as being fundamentally flawed. Yep. It was almost completely rewritten at Select Committee stage in response to hundreds of submissions. And that rewritten bill was not subject to proper consultation. The Ministry for Economic Development, as it was then, met with 35 selected organisations. And then that rewritten bill was rushed through under urgency with all final stages occurring on one day, 12 April 2005. In that 14 years since that time, the Act has also been subject to a series of amendments that have also been rushed through under urgency without proper consultation and often not properly thought through in my opinion. So, Minister, I apologise that what I'm about to say is probably going to be direct. Yes, we've got a 20-minute time frame. We're trying to get quite complex concepts across in 20 minutes. So everything I say is said with respect, but it is also said with concern. I'm concerned that we don't need to modernise the Act. We need to get it right in the first place. Yes. Thank you. Minister, it is Labour Party policy to conduct, to prioritise the long-promised review of the Charities Act, beginning with a first principles review of the legislation, including examining, updating and widening, rather than narrowing, the definition of charitable purpose. And I often hear the concept of charitable purpose aligned with a first principles review. And it's as if by taking out the definition of charitable purpose, that's all that a first principles review involves. But there are many other first principles involved in this legislation that we really need to clarify. And my concern with this review, with respect, is that the terms of reference are too narrow. They will not allow those key concerns to be addressed. In addition, the time frame, in my view, is too short. The review is wanted to be completed within this term of government, which will require legislation to be passed before the election next year. We all know how long legislation takes. That will require all policy work to be done by August this year, which is a few weeks. The issues in this area of law are complex, and their impact is far-reaching. In my view, we risk making the situation worse. In my view, we need an independent Law Commission review, as occurred with incorporated societies and trusts, and we need to fund the Law Commission to do this work properly. Fast law does not make good law. So, this consultation process that is going on at the moment could feed into a Law Commission review if we are able to get it. These are a few of the concerns that we have with this current review, and if there's time, I'd love to touch on them. We are pressing for time, and really what we're here for is to hear from you rather than you to hear from us, so we're going really fast. I'm sorry about that. We have prepared an issues paper. It runs to about 85 pages, which I think perhaps underscores some of the legal complexity in these issues. We've also got a summary paper, which runs to about 7 or 8 pages, and we're more than happy to make that available. But while I'm on this slide, I'd like to talk about the last bullet point, sanctions and funding. And those of you who've had a chance to have a look at the discussion document will have noticed that there's a whole section where Charity Services would like to increase its powers. And if you go along a bit further, there's a section talking about funding. And my concern is that they're going to come along and ask the charitable sector to fund this regime. And what really concerns me is I don't think we should be increasing powers or asking charities to fund this regime until we have agreement on what this regime is trying to achieve and why. The fundamental purpose of the regime is not agreed. I'm concerned how can we determine if the Act is fit for purpose if we don't have agreement on what that purpose is? This regime is about accountability. It is not about regulation. Prior to the Charities Act, charities enjoyed the trust and confidence of the public. Sometimes there seems to be a perception that they're getting public trust and confidence from the Act. You already had public trust and confidence prior to the Act. This Act was intended to weed out the bad charities, those charities that are involved in fraud, money laundering, tax avoidance, whatever it might be. It was not intended as a means for government to exercise power and control over the charitable sector. It is an information and disclosure regime. By filing financial information on the register, making it publicly available, people can decide for themselves whether any particular charity is worthy of their support. The purpose of the monitoring regime is to ensure that charities continue to act in furtherance of their stated charitable purpose, because that was the problem this regime is trying to fix. Anybody could stand on a street corner and rattle a bucket. You would never know if they actually worked for a charity. You wouldn't know if the charity was actually legitimate, and you wouldn't know what happened with the money. This regime is about information, not regulation, in my view.
Services of the Act. Those first two there were originally activities of a Charities Commission, which was an arm's length from government. They were brought in to be purposes, but they are really just activities. And the problem we've got is that they have led to what's now Charity Services, becoming much more involved in what charities are doing. As Sue said, there's an issue around that public trust and confidence. Somebody summed it up very nicely for me the other day when they said, you don't promote public trust and confidence in the charitable sector by deregistering charities. You do it by supporting the whole concept of charity, using the information off the register to counteract baseless publicity and criticism of the sector that occurs in the media, and sometimes I've got to acknowledge in Parliament. There is, and it's important, I'd acknowledge in the discussion document that you've got in front of you, there is a comment about a possible purpose to support and sustain a robust, vibrant, independent and innovative sector, and that's what we need, a commitment to actually support a strong sector, not to do these two more mechanical kind of purposes because of the risks that are involved there. So I'll pass you back to Sue.
Thank you. I know you're not supposed to do this, and I would ask for your indulgence, but this is a review of this book, Regulating Charities, The Inside Story. I appreciate the irony of the title. It compares the charities law frameworks of 5 countries, including New Zealand, and I would commend it to you particularly while the review of the Charities Act is on. But John Tyler from the Ewan Marion Kaufman Foundation said this, and it encapsulates beautifully the concern that I'm trying to express. It seems to me that the sector's affirmative purposes in and roles in and contributions to their respective societies should precede regulation thereof. And that's why we spent so much time at the beginning of this presentation focusing on the importance of the charitable sector, because somehow the importance of the charitable sector seems to have got lost. The sector seems to have become seen as a fiscal cost, something to be reduced, whereas the fact that it's the glue that holds our society together seems to have become lost. Stated differently, why increase public trust and confidence? Why pursue effectiveness and accountability? A prerequisite should be ensuring that respect for boundaries protects against harmful regulation and regulators infringing on or interfering with the fundamental roles and purpose of the charitable sector and its members. Without that grounding at the forefront, there are non-tenuous risks that the charitable sector gets perceived and regulated as if a loophole or as a means for government abdicating its responsibilities or using the sector to address fiscal deficits. It may be that regulatory purposes of ensuring effectiveness and accountability threaten to morph into overreaching exercises of governmental power in the name of enhancing trust and confidence. And that is exactly what I'm seeing in my practice. And it's not just advocacy, and it's not just business, which are two of the issues discussed in the discussion document. It's sport. There has been a purging of sporting organisations around this country. It's social housing. There's been a review of social housing providers and a saga of the previous government trying to work around it. It's economic development, it's social enterprise, you name it. At what cost may be important to have as an ever-present policy question about the sector, especially with regard to intangible non-financial costs to common law, rule of law rather than rule of power, and other contributions of the sector to society. And that point about rule of law rather than rule of power is important, because I'm seeing in my practice good charities that meet all the legal requirements for registration being denied registration. And I think if we had proper checks and balances in the system, that would not be able to happen.
And here's just one example of that kind of overreach. It's a particular section of the Act, the unintended consequences there, that the government monitoring agency is to have regard to charities' activities under that particular section to determine whether the charity is continuing to act in furtherance of its stated charitable purpose. Now bear in mind that our stated charitable purpose is something, once we're registered, Charity Services has approved that as a good thing to do, if you like, under the legislation. But it's being taken further now. So legitimate activities that charities are doing are being vetted, and legal implications drawn about that, which are not appropriate, not relevant to what the charities are actually doing. There's a misunderstanding happening there, which is unhelpful to the sector.
So I want to move really quickly, but if we have got an opportunity to make some legislative change at the moment with this review as it is, the key single biggest issue that needs to be changed in my view is to clarify the nature of the hearing on appeal. This is one of the key unintended consequences that came from the changes that were made at Select Committee stage in 2004. There's a little stroke of the pen. They changed the word district and put the word high. But unfortunately in doing that, they didn't clarify the nature of the hearing on appeal. An appeal to the district court is conducted as a first instance oral hearing. So if you want to prove what your purposes are or that they operate for the public benefit, you call your witnesses. They're available for cross-examination. You cross-examine the decision maker. So there's a robust evidential platform for the decision maker to make a decision that everyone can live with. But an appeal to the High Court assumes you've already had an oral hearing at the tribunal below. But neither Charity Services nor the Charities Registration Board conduct an oral hearing. So the net effect of that is that the mechanisms in our justice system for establishing questions of fact are completely denied to New Zealand's charities. This is causing unfairness, and it's causing our law to become distorted, in my view. The second biggest issue is that we have to clarify that charities can appeal all decisions. This was another of the biggest issues at Select Committee stage in 2004. The original bill said charities can only appeal registration decisions. Submissions strongly opposed that, and the Act ultimately did get this point right and made it clear that charities could appeal all decisions under the Act. But when the Charities Commission was disestablished and its functions transferred in 2012, they amended Section 59 so that you could only amend decisions of the board. Now the board only makes decisions about registration, so we're back to the pre-2004 position. But unfortunately, again, fast law doesn't make good law. They didn't do it properly. If you look at Section 61, it says the High Court can make can change the decision of the board or the chief executive. So the two provisions are inconsistent. So it's not clear whether actually charities' rights of appeal have been removed. But in 2016, the Department of Internal Affairs tried to put in a statutes amendment bill to try to make it clear that your rights of appeal had been taken away. We fought back, and that amendment was taken out of the bill, but the uncertainty remains. So we need to make it clear in this legislation that charities are able to appeal all decisions, as would be the case with any comparable regime. Look at the Incorporated Societies Act, Companies Act, Industrial and Provident Societies Act. And while I'm on appeals, if I could just make one point, there's so much that I would love to talk about, and there's more detail in the issues paper, but a key point is that this law came from the tax law. Prior to 2005, charities cases were decided under tax legislation. Under tax legislation, you get a choice. You can go to the Taxation Review Authority or the High Court. The Taxation Review Authority is a low-cost jurisdiction. You don't get your name plastered all over the papers. There's no risk of getting a costs award against you. Relaxed rules of evidence. But some issues would be better off in the High Court, and that's why you're given a choice. And I think something similar would work well for New Zealand, because the definition of charitable purpose and the trust law that it derives from, it resides in equity, and actually sometimes the High Court is going to be appropriate, but sometimes just to be able to get yourself to court, you don't need to be represented by a lawyer. To have that choice, I think it would be a significant change that needs to be made.
Thanks, Sue. Moving on to advocacy. Actually, just on that previous slide, sorry, just very quickly. That's for the back one. That suggestion of a specialist charity tribunal. One of the results I've noticed in our survey that we're just starting to get results from, 83% of the charities who responded suggested that we need a specialist charity tribunal at that lower level so that they can hear evidence on appeal. Yeah, advocacy. An Australian expert, excuse me, an Australian expert in part of their review of what was happening in Australia also looked at New Zealand legislation and described what was happening here as complex, highly subjective and unworkable in practice. I mean, that's an Australian view, so yeah. But what we do know from Susan and my experience is that the current situation around advocacy is having a chilling effect. In that same survey, I think 58% of the charities that responded said that the fact that they are a registered charity does affect how much advocacy they feel that they can safely do. And yet the reality is charities have a duty to advocate in furtherance of their charitable purpose. And there's increasing literature, you know, in their whole academic study of civil society and of charities around the world, that we have a responsibility inseparable from our charitable purpose to advocate. Of course, it's a key part of a healthy democracy too. We have the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, Section 14, that guarantees freedom of expression to every New Zealander. And I don't think that our charities legislation is supposed to override the Bill of Rights Act. And finally, of course, as Sue mentioned earlier, there's Labour and Green Party policy about charities being able to advocate without fear of losing their registered charitable status. But as I said, 58% of organisations expressed that they do have that fear. So back to Sue.
So what do we do about it?
Yeah.
What concerns me is that the discussion document presents Charities Services' interpretation of the law in this area as if it was the law. With all due respect, it is not accepted as the law. In fact, it is hotly disputed, as evidenced, for example, by the Family First and Greenpeace appeals that are working their way through the courts at the moment. And I'm very concerned that we're going to get clarification or guidance on an interpretation that is complex, highly subjective and unworkable in practice. I put forward a different solution and asked for it to be put in the discussion document. It's not in there, it is in the issues paper if you would like a copy. But basically, the High Court in the Foundation for Anti-Aging Research case set down the law in this area. It's the three simple questions. Are your purposes, stated purposes, charitable? Well, if you're a registered charity, tick. Is your advocacy carried out in furtherance of those stated charitable purposes? If so, tick. No difficulty. It's actually, the law in this area is actually not that complex. if we followed the approach of the High Court of the Foundation for Anti-Aging Research case, which actually is the approach now being taken by Canada in legislation, and they've just had a case recognising that deregistering charities for advocating for their charitable purposes is a breach of their right to freedom of expression. There's only really one rule. Charities can be political, they just can't be partisan. I think we're agreed around the common law world that it's not okay for a charity to advocate for a particular political party or a particular candidate for public office. Beyond that, they have a duty to advocate for their charitable purposes. Otherwise, our democracy loses their voice. There are other rules around hate speech, which are already there, defamation. There's lots of rules around speech. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in this legislation. What we need to do is bring it back to first principles and clarify that charities can advocate in furtherance of their charitable purposes.
We'll move on quickly to the area of charities and business. Just see, we've got a couple more slides. I know we're running tight on time. Just in relation to businesses, charities, the legal position is that charities are entitled to run businesses to raise funds for their charitable purpose. So long as the funds are going to the charitable purpose, what's the problem? I know there's a train of thought, if you like, that Charity Services has a responsibility to protect the funds that have been donated to charities, but the reality is the governance group of charities have responsibilities, whether it's under the Incorporated Societies Act or the Trusts Act or the companies legislation. Those responsibilities are there. We don't need Charity Services adding further responsibility. And just on structure, just briefly, harking back to 2002, before we even had this legislation, part of what formed that legislation was this 2002 Working Party did a huge national consultation. I wasn't in the country at the time, but I wasn't part of it, but I certainly read the results with interest. It's our strong view that a Charities Commission would be most acceptable to the charity sector. It would mean the costs of monitoring and enforcement are likely to be less if the sector supports and has confidence in the organisation. Any lesser alternative would fail to adequately recognise the importance and independence of the charitable sector. So I'll pass you back to Sue just to wind up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Just in conclusion, we've just had a conference in Wellington last week organised by the Charity Law Association of Australia and New Zealand in conjunction with Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand with support from Charities Services. And there is another one in Melbourne in August if you would like to attend. What we're really trying to do, I think, is follow the Australian model in this context and bring people together. I think if the charitable sector spoke with one voice, it would be a force to be reckoned with. We have established a Facebook page, Charities Act Review. You're very, very welcome to join. There's also a LinkedIn group, NZ Charity Law, and those are our contact details if you would like a copy of the issues paper. But our key message, and this slide needs to be updated, please make a submission. The charitable sector really needs to stand up and be counted. Please speak up, make sure your voice is heard, and make a submission by 31 May 2019. Thank you very much.
I was so aware that you were having to race through probably a whole day's worth of content. So you did very, very well. I felt quite anxious for you actually. We've got time probably for one question. Otherwise, again, obviously there's other ways that you can connect with Sue and Dave and afterwards as well, in terms of giving feedback to them. Lucky.
Sheriff Dean from Stop and Violent Services. I cannot work out why the definition of charity is not involved in this. What are your thoughts?
It would be great if it was. On the other hand, I think both Sue and I feel that we can live with not including it. There are so many really pressing issues that do need to be dealt with. in this process. We'd much rather it was a longer process with the Law Commission oversight of the review. Given what we've got, we're working with this. Relating to the definition, we can live with that, provided the interpretation of that is straightened out a bit.
Yes, I'd like to echo that. In my view, it's not the definition of charitable purpose that's wrong. The definition is sophisticated, nuanced, it's served us well for 4 centuries, it's perfectly well capable of serving us well into the future. It's the way that it is interpreted that is causing the difficulty. And that's why I think we need to go back to first principles to set. One of the speakers at the conference talked about swimming between the flags. It's a lovely Australian metaphor. And he was talking about where are the flags for charity services? Where are the signposts and the lodestars? That's why, in my view, we need to go back to the purpose of the Act and also some of the parameters around how to interpret the definition of charitable purpose, because that is such a key issue that really needs to be addressed, particularly with Te Ao Māori. Justice Joe Williams spoke at our conference last week, spoke beautifully about how New Zealand could, if we looked at this, took a blank sheet of paper and looked at this definition again afresh, what could we create from New Zealand's perspective? And in my view, we could do that. The difficulties that many Māori organisations are having with the definition of charitable purpose are echoed in organisations up and down the country. It's the same problem, and it really needs to be fixed, in my view.
Thank you, Sue. On that note, the next steps is